From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network. I'm Jeff Wickman. As usual, we end the week with a recap of all of the activity taking place in the grain market with K-State grain market economist Dan O'Brien. This week, he covers possible delays in harvesting as well as the uncertainty of export markets. K-State crop production and cropping system specialist Ignacio Ciampitti discusses the critical phase for soybean producers to be harvesting their crop in order to maximize profits. We'll also have this week's wheat scoop, and K-State climatologist Mary Knapp passes along a much cooler, wetter outlook for Kansas for this weekend and into next week. It's all just ahead on Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Listening to Agriculture Today. I'm Jeff Wickman. Up first, our weekly look at the activity taking place in the grain market. K-State grain market economist Dan O'Brien says that wet weather in Iowa, Illinois, and Minnesota could delay harvest in those areas, and that uncertainty in export markets is another concern for producers. Dan, as we start off, the price action this last week, what were we seeing in the markets?
Well, we've seen in the last few days some recovery in corn and soybeans, and even some decent action in wheat. On yesterday's closes, the corn market was up about 6 cents to 3.50. Well, December contract closed up to 3.52, and that was up about 20 cents from before. And a combination of some encouraging export news and overly moist areas in the central corn belt in Iowa, parts of Illinois, up into Minnesota, et cetera, that could end up and bring us significant harvest delays. So a combination of those two were supportive for the feed grains, at least feed grain futures. Again, so I saw one headline in the ag press saying, gosh, we've got 350 corn and 850 soybeans. Who would have thought we'd seen that after the negative news that we've had to deal with on trade and in crop size as far as price impact over the last month or so. So it is 352. It's not 452, and it's 850 for beans. It's not 950, but because of, I think, mainly production worries and some positive export news, we've seen at least some recovery in corn and soybean futures. And really, at this time of year, you're looking to figure out, well, gosh, if harvest is upon us or coming upon us, are we looking for lows sometime? So probably in the next 1 or 2 weeks, we'll be watching to see how prices hold up and start to at least ask the question of whether, as we were seeing the low of a week or so ago in September, will that hold up of being, I guess, the lowest price we see this fall? If so, then that would probably bode for some positive news coming on prices as we head off into coming months.
As we talk about corn, we are seeing some ethanol closings in Iowa?
Yes. There were reports of 1 or 2 ethanol plants closing, and I think the key issue there was just the buildup of stocks of ethanol on the one hand, and really not due to any tremendous strengthening in corn prices that would work against the profitability of those plants, but with the buildup of stocks, they've seen the ethanol price drop down to about $1.25 a gallon. And with that, I guess the last time we calculated the estimated profitability of those central U.S. plants, they were break even to down 1 to 5 cents, and really the lack of strength in ethanol prices since then it didn't help the situation. Now, some will say that these were planned closures, and that at this time of year can certainly occur. So I think 1 or 2 or 3 plants is a sign that, gosh, there's not outstanding profitability out there. If you get 5, 10, 15, then you start to really see the industry having, I guess that'd be an implicit sign of profitability problems and challenges in ethanol production profitability.
You mentioned the wet conditions in Iowa, Illinois, some other states in that area. As you mentioned, possible delay in the harvest. What could that mean?
Well, at least it would bring up the question of whether the large crop projection that the USDA came up with in the last September report, again, going from about 14.5 in its August projection up to about 14.8, whether that will actually come to fruition or not. And really the strong rains that we've seen, and really pretty much very wet conditions all the way through the summer up into the northern Iowa, southern Minnesota area. Now heading off, you can see on the moisture maps, you see some effect in southern Wisconsin, parts of Illinois, and much less the eastern Corn Belt now with Hurricane Florence having come ashore and done its damage locally there in the Carolinas, but also having gone on inland and saturated soils in some of those key eastern Corn Belt states. So now you've got a question as to whether the excessive moisture will cause any damage to the crop, any problems as we try to get into the harvest season and make progress there. So here we've absorbed this information and we've gained 20 or 30 cents. That's not. And again, December corn at $3.50. I think real concerns and actual problems showing up would take us higher than that. $3.75, $4 as we look at significant amounts of corn being affected at this year's crop. And how do you define that? 100, 200, 300, 400 million bushels of corn. Generally, even though harvests are delayed, we're able to get into those fields and get the majority of those grains out. But if problems persist, excessive moisture goes longer term, then eventually you start to have an impact on the production this year and the price prospects. Again, we're very early on that. If things turn dry, then we'll look back at this and the market won't be that concerned. But right now, that dry weather has to come, and we'll see if it does.
In terms of export news for corn and grain sorghum, where do we stand in terms of the supply-demand factors?
Well, that demand factor is looking more positive now for corn. Based on yesterday's USDA report, shipments of about 42 million bushels, which would be near, not quite 2, but near what would be needed for this marketing year's pace. And again, and we haven't even really got into our harvest yet in a big way, so you'd expect that number to be stronger. But the forward sales had jumped up to to over 50 million bushels, and that's indicative of some strength in corn export demand down the road. Here in Kansas, of course, and really across the country, but here in Kansas in particular, we're concerned about grain sorghum exports, and I think it's likely that business won't show up until we actually get the crop out of the field. Right now, things are moving pretty slow in terms of grain sorghum exports and forward purchases, but I think the real test of that will probably come when we get into October, November, December, and when buyers start to look at the cost of various feed grains and then make their decisions on what they buy from there. As of yet, that business really hasn't shown up for grain sorghum.
There seems to be uncertainty along those lines. Does that create problems for the producers?
Absolutely. I think uncertainty at this time of year makes it a lot easier to store corn, grain sorghum in either on-farm or even commercial storage and to wait for something better to happen down the road. Of course, at this time of year, you have sellers that are, again, absentee landowners, people with cash flow needs, et cetera, that are inclined to sell pretty quickly off the combine or with just short-term storage with the idea of avoiding storage costs, which can be, if they're commercial, 4 to, in some cases, 6 cents a bushel or a month, depending on where you're at and what the local competitive situation is for storage. So there'll be some grain that will move out of the fields directly into the hands of buyers, elevators, ethanol plants, livestock feeders, whatever. But for the rest of grain, with the amount of storage we've built around Kansas and really all throughout the Midwest, in the Western Corn Belt anyway, you'd anticipate a fair amount of grain going off into storage and eventually the market having to bid up cash prices enough to entice that grain out of farmers' hands.
And what does it look like then for wheat?
The outlook for wheat is following the pattern of the last several weeks. I hear we'd got down to a low of just about $5 within the last about 10, 14 days ago, and have jumped up now to $5.27. And we've seen some news come into the market about export prospects. Again, continued dryness in parts of Europe, particularly France and Germany, again, important wheat producers, a freeze and some other issues, ongoing drought effect in Australia. So you have that news now that the market has had to digest. Really, in some mixed positive and negative, I think, out of Russia and the Black Sea region, news out of Ukraine that their crop's really doing pretty good, their harvest, etc., and statements from Russia that, yes, they have adequate wheat available for the market. Really, the question there, I think, has to do with food quality versus feed quality. Yes, I know they have sizable crops in the Black Sea region, but what's the percentage of that crop that we would directly compete with in terms of we in the U.S. would compete with in terms of a food product? So we'll see where all that goes. I think the toughest sign for Kansas wheat producers is, as you look at key elevator locations across the various parts of the state, we've seen a tangible weakening of basis by 20, 30 cents in almost all locations. And that's just happened, bulk of it happened between 3 and 4 weeks ago. And now we're after that adjustment, we have gone steadily sideways. But again, from the northwest, the north central, to northeast, southwest, south central, southeast areas of the state, you see a decided correction in wheat basis to the low side. And I would anticipate, Jeff, that we'll probably stay there until we actually see hard number export business come and start to try to pull wheat out of Kansas. And when that happens, you'd sure anticipate that's when you'd see the basis correct.
That's K-State grain market economist Dan O'Brien. His complete market outlook, including the weekly grain market review, U.S. drought monitor, and basis reports for corn, wheat, and soybean, can be found online at agmanager.info. agmanager.info. This is the K-State Radio Network.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
This is Agriculture Today. The weather conditions for mid-September to mid-October will be critical for soybean in terms of seed filling and determining final seed weight. Soybean will reach final maturity with a high seed water content, moving from 90% to around 60% from seed filling until final maturity, or the formation of the black layer in the seeds. K-State crop production and cropping system specialist Ignacio Ciampitti says that they're conducting research to better identify the dry down rate for soybean.
One of the things that we tend to discuss at this time of the year is how we can start helping farmers to time harvest. A couple weeks we discussed about corn, and we discussed about conditions that are helping corn to dry down and the moment to harvest. For soybeans, it's a little bit different in the sense that soybeans are more sensitive, and soybeans, they will reach harvest time quite fast. So if I look at the conditions that we are presenting today across the state, based on the last USDA report, we are seeing that I would say more than 50% of our soybeans are classified as really good in excellent conditions. We are only around 16-20% based on that USDA report on dropping leaves, which means that, we are turning from the moment that soybeans are looking green, yellow, and then those plants start to lose all the leaves. So as you see on the weather conditions, and if you see the conditions that we were experiencing this week on temperatures a little bit above normal, just a little. Just a little. But conditions for next coming days will change to be cooler. So, when you're looking at this change in pattern, still one of our concerns is basically how long it will last from the moment that we are reaching black layer and the maturity till the moment that the soybeans will be ready to harvest. And one of the things that we need to understand on soybeans, if we look at the moment that soybeans are from pod formation, from the moment that forming those pods and the seeds start growing in that pod. Those soybeans, usually the seeds will start with 90%, 95% of that is only just water, nothing else. And this is starting slowly in the moment of changing. During the seed filling, during the moment that the carbon is going to those seeds and filling those seeds, the only thing that happens in those seeds is some replacement of water by carbon. And we are seeing that since the seeds filling time, we are going from 90% to close to 60 to 55% of water. And that is a moisture content overall that we are saying that we have number, and is a moment that basically we say that those seeds are reaching black layer or maturity. So black layer means when you open the pods and you look at the base of the seeds, you will find a black spot. So that black spot basically is an incision that will show that seed is separated from the pod. Separated means that there is no more nutrient or water that is coming from the main plant to the seed. It means that seed reached the maximum weight. And then from the moment that we say that it's in black layer or mature, the seed will only just losing water. And then black layer usually is attained on soybeans between 50 to 60% of water content. So imagine that many of our farmers are harvesting soybeans with 13. So from 50 to 60, that is just maximum weight. The only thing that will happen to harvest time is just losing water. It's what we call the dry down. This is why it's important, the dry down. And one of the main questions is how fast, those soybeans dry down in the field. And the importance of the answer to this question is to make sure that we arrive on time. So let's discuss what are the consequences of not arriving on time. Many times, and one of the main consequences, and people will understand when we start talking about money. If you arrive too long, and if you wait too long, and if you wait when the soybean water content is below 13, so let's go to an example, soybean content is 9%. So farmers, us, when we are selling soybeans, we are selling volume, we are selling weight. So in that weight, we are allowed to sell water. So we are allowed to sell seed that has 13% of water. So what happens if you say a seed that has lower water content? You are selling less weight.
You're losing money.
You're losing money. So if we wait too long, and sometimes too long, we will discuss this, it might be a couple days, not much. And that's the issue on soybeans, compared with corn. Corn is a little bit more forgiving. The dry down rate is a little bit slow, and we have time. Many times, as a farmers, we understand that if conditions are not good to enter with a combine, you might have an issue of really going and harvest that field. But some situations, you might be able to harvest today, and if you don't do it today versus Friday, you might lose money. And that's how drastic are the changes on soybeans. One of the main things that I always tend to emphasize is when you're looking at your soybean growth and development, think about the seed is losing water before black layer, before matures, but gaining weight. And then after it reaches the maturity, that seed continues to lose water, but already attained the maximum weight. So the second phase of losing water is basically the phase that we really want to identify and to make sure that we can get some information so we can harvest on time. The challenge is, and the thing why we were interested in this, is to help farmers to become more timely in harvesting and to avoid losing money. So we did a study in the last couple of years, 2016, and then we did it in 2017, and we are also conducting another study in 2018, just to start understanding basically this interaction of water loss. So in that study, we basically were reaching black layer at the end of September 29th. From that moment until 13%, someone might guess how many days will happen. And you will say, well, I'm losing more or less. We were reaching black layer with 58% specifically, and we were from 58 to 13. So in order to reach to 13, we have around 45 points of water that we need to lose. So it took us, based on those weather conditions, 15 days to lose from 58 to 13. And basically, that soybean optimal moment to harvest was October 14.
And you're seeing that across the state?
In many situations, it changed because, the main question that the farmer will ask, is basically what are the main factors affecting the dry down. As a rule of thumb, we usually tend to say that soybeans, they might lose around 3% of water per day. Most of the times we say that 3% tends to be really fast. In corn, we were discussing that the dry down is usually around 1% per day. So you can see that corn will tend to lose water really slow. And again, if you are in 13% today and ready to harvest, if you harvest on Friday, you might be as well in 9%. So, and that difference of not harvesting today versus harvesting 2 or 3 days after, it might basically make you to lose money because you are losing weight of selling that grain. The main factors that really explaining or affecting soybean dry down are specifically connected to relative humidity, temperature, and at some points, precipitation, but everything is connected to relative humidity. So if you are in a high temperature situation, the dry down will be really fast. Okay, those seeds will lose weight quite fast. So what will be the scenario to have a very slow dry down? Those scenarios are connected to situations that you have low temperatures. So many times that we are planting late, and those soybeans tend to mature late in the season. Anything that is coming or mature in the first, second week of October, it will take longer to dry down. Even when it's really fast, rather than being 3%, maybe we'll go more close to a 2% of water content. So there is some variability. And then the other factor, temperature is one, and we mentioned relative humidity. So if you are in a really high relative humidity, that kernel, that seed, tends to re-wet. It will dry down 3%, and if you have a day of high relative humidity, it will get some kind of a moisture from the air. So there is a balance between the relative humidity around the pods and the relative humidity inside of the pods and the seeds. And one of the things that I always want to emphasize when we discuss about dry down is basically look at the dry down conditions, look at your forecast, try to look at your next 7 days, next 14 days, go to the fields, because many times, in order really to determine if you are at maturity or not, you really need to go to the field. Many times we tend to say that soybeans are mature when one of the pods in the plant is turning brown. Okay, so you have that kind of observation, but also we say just go out and make sure that you just open the pods, look at see if you can find those black layers, inside of the bottom of the seeds. Many times if it's really dry, the seeds you will be shaking, and then you will listening that the seeds are detaching from the pods. That's a sign of those seeds are not depending on the plant. The only thing that will happen to those seeds after they are mature, they will only depend on the weather conditions. So with this in mind, we're working to try to use weather information to start helping, in those predictions. Because as we know today, one of the things that farmers want to know is not only just what happened in one location, but what happened in many multiple locations or in my farm. So this dry down on soybeans basically, and the rate of dry down is connected to specifically weather environment. So if we are able to get some good information as we are collecting now, plus connecting this to weather data of temperature and relative humidity, we can start predicting very well, when is the optimal time for harvest. The main goal of this project is basically to start helping farmers to really be on time on harvest, to really be making sure that we are maximizing profits, that we are protecting during the entire growing season, and realizing those profits. Not leaving any yield on the table just because we are a little bit too late.
That's K-State Crop Production and Cropping System Specialist Ignacio Ciampitti. More information on dry down rates for soybean can be found in the Agronomy e-update at agronomy.k-state.edu/extension. This is the K-State Radio Network.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State research and extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
Welcome back, and thanks for joining us on Agriculture Today. I'm Jeff Wickman. In today's agricultural news, just how consistent were Kansas farms in their financial performance over the last several years? That question was addressed by a new analysis conducted by a K-State agricultural economist. Using Kansas Farm Management Association data from 2013 through 2017, Beth Yeager attempted to gauge the persistence of financial performance for over 600 farms in the state.
What we wanted to know in terms of persistence of financial performance was looking at a number of years or periods and a farmer or producer's ability to continue to produce at either a higher level or perform at a higher level over time, and the number of years that they could maintain that higher level. We also, though, when we look at persistence, in some instances, we were looking at those operators who were continuing to perform at a lower level. And so the measure that we looked at for financial performance was the operating profit margin ratio, and then divided all of our farms into quartiles. So we were looking at over a 5-year period. And so when we talk about persistence, we're wanting to know, all right, for more than 1 year, how often were they in either the top quartile or the bottom quartile?
Yeager notes that scores of variables influence that performance. That considered, she discovered that it's a challenge for farms to maintain financial performance at the upper end of the range year after year.
Only about 2% of the farms were in that top profit margin quartile for all 5 years. But then as we looked at 3, 4, or 5 years, there were about 17.5% of the farms that fell in that top quartile. So overall, I think that's a good sign that almost 20% of our farms were in that top profit margin quartile for at least 3 years. And it is also higher than the number that were in the bottom profit margin quartile for 3 or more years. So only about 16% of the farms were consistently having the lower operating profit margin ratio. So the remainder then would have been in either the top profit margin quartile 1 or 2 of the years, or in the bottom for 1 or 2 of the years.
Yeager's next objective is to further analyze the factors that most greatly influence these financial performance trends. However, she says that some of those are already clear.
The ones that did consistently fall into that top profit margin quartile had higher value farm production. Being a lower cost producer, the value of your output, so the price that you're receiving, plays a big factor, and then just your efficiency overall. So your production practices, how well you're converting your inputs to outputs is really important.
That's K-State agricultural economist Beth Yeager. To see the entire report, go to agmanager.info. Dan Glickman, the former U.S. Secretary of Agriculture and longtime congressman from Kansas, will receive an honorary doctorate from Kansas State University. The awarding of the honorary doctorate was approved by the Kansas Board of Regents at its meeting yesterday, and is the highest honor Kansas State University can give. Glickman will be presented with the honor at the graduate school's fall commencement ceremony on December 7th in Bramlage Coliseum. Glickman represented the state's 4th Congressional District from 1977 to 1995. During that time, he was a member of the House Agriculture Committee, including 6 years as chair of the subcommittee with jurisdiction over federal farm policy issues. In 1995, Glickman was appointed Secretary of Agriculture by President Bill Clinton and served in that post until 2001. Glickman earned a bachelor's in history from the University of Michigan and a law degree from the George Washington University Law School. And in this week's Wheat Scoop, Jordan Hildebrand reports on a student who's been awarded a scholarship from the Kansas Association of Wheat Growers.
A history of leadership, service, and academic excellence led Mariah Kimsey of Fredonia to receive the 2018 Herb Clutter Memorial Scholarship, awarded by the Kansas Association of Wheat Growers. The scholarship, established in 2009, will award $500 toward her enrollment at Kansas State University, where she will pursue a degree in agricultural economics. The Herb Clutter Memorial Scholarship was established through a fund in memory of Herbert Clutter, a farmer from Holcomb and the first president of the National Association of Wheat Growers. The history of the Kansas Association of Wheat Growers and the Kansas Wheat Commission is enriched with the memory and lasting leadership of Clutter and his family. Kimsey said, "I'm very thankful for the scholarship and grateful to have been selected. I lived on a ranch my whole life, so agriculture has always been a part of me. I think that it is important for the agriculture community to have people that are willing to be a part of it, to keep it growing." Kimsey graduated from Fredonia High School in May 2018 as one of the top members of her class. She grew up on her family's cattle ranch, assisting in managing the cow-calf operation. These agriculture experiences have helped Kimsey's role in community service projects and extracurricular activities. She has been a member of her local FFA, FCCLA, Student Council, Be the Change, Kansas State Fair, Hope After Harvey, and volunteered after the Starbuck wildfire. While helping out after the Starbuck wildfire in March 2017, Kimsey initially started with the idea to gather volunteers to help. When a member of the community donated money to help, the idea grew where they asked local businesses to help donate. She said she never knew it could grow to be something so big in the short amount of time she was planning it. Kimsey said helping and organizing the Starbuck wildfire relief has impacted what she wants to do in the future. Kimsey said, "I kind of decided that there's not a lot of things out there to help agriculturalists after natural disasters. There's a need for that. In the future, I'd like to start a nonprofit organization to assist agriculturalists after a natural disaster." Maria's passions for her community and agriculture have made her an excellent recipient of the scholarship. We're proud to encourage high school students like Maria to pursue a career in the wheat industry. Applicants for the annual Herb Clutter Memorial Scholarship must be an incoming freshman from Kansas who will be a full-time student at any 2- or 4-year Kansas college or university. They should plan to pursue a career in the field of agriculture. Mr. Clutter's enthusiasm and leadership for the wheat industry serves as an excellent example for young adults as they take this next step in their lives. We are honored to offer a scholarship in remembrance of Herb Clutter and share his passion for the industry and his community with future generations of wheat leaders. To learn more about the Herb Clutter Memorial Scholarship, please go to kansaswheat.org/clutter. For Kansas Wheat, this is Jordan Hildebrand.
And that's a look at today's agricultural news. This reminder to listen to the podcast version of Agriculture Today, visit agtoday.net, agtoday.net, or using an app on your mobile device, type these search keywords, Agriculture, Today, Kansas, and you'll find this program. By tapping the subscribe button, brand new episodes of Agriculture Today will automatically arrive on your device. That's agtoday.net. This is the K-State Radio Network.
Legal and financial concerns surround the day-to-day management of the agricultural industry. Producers, ag creditors, and USDA agencies rely on Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. If you've received an adverse decision from the USDA or have an ag credit concern, call today 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services, exploring options, generating solutions.
Welcome back to Agriculture Today. After several days above 90 and just in time for the start of fall, temperatures across Kansas are going to be much more seasonal, if not a little below normal, for the weekend and heading into next week. Here to discuss this week's agricultural weather outlook is K-State climatologist Mary Knapp. Mary, it seems like Kansas, 90 degree one day and 70 the next. That's just how it happens sometimes.
Right, and it's especially true as we get into the fall season where we get these frontal systems that come through and result in an abrupt change in conditions. And in fact, on Thursday, we saw that with the winds that were coming before the advance of the front. So it can be quite dramatic. One thing that we look at last week's data going up through Tuesday of this week, and precipitation across the state was pretty much non-existent. There were a few places that had some, but South Central actually averaged 0.05 of an inch. That was the only division that had anything that was measurable, and that was only 7% of what they should get for a week.
What does that do then for the drought outlook?
Well, when we look at the drought situation, the East Central and the Northeast are really the only divisions that are continuing to show signs of drought. When we look at the year-to-date, the East Central is the lowest, and it's only at 71% of normal, and that's even with the heavy rains that we had last week. Northeast fares a little bit better because some of the northern parts of the division saw moisture, but they're still only 85% of normal for the year-to-date. September is looking a little bit more promising. All of the divisions except the Northwest are above normal for September. Northwest is at 86% of normal, so it's not very far behind. Its deficit is only an 0.08 of an inch. They've had a much more even distribution in their rainfall, so even though they're slightly behind for September, conditions are overall very good. It's the east and the east central where we still have significant drought. There is a small pocket of exceptional drought, which is the worst status, right along the Kansas River in the Leavenworth, Wyandotte, northern Johnson County area. A much larger area that's in extreme drought, and part of that you can look at, even though they had 4 or 5 inches of rain, they still have a significant deficit. Much of that ran off into the stream flows, but we have pond levels that are still low, and in those streams, they went up for a very short time, and then they're back down at very low levels. So that's fueling the current drought status in that area.
Sometimes we forget that although storms move through and they look like they're going to produce a lot of rainfall and do, it doesn't always translate into really helping with the drought outlook.
Right. And again, to keep in mind that when we look at that drought situation, the roots of the drought go way back to last winter, and even a significant storm like we've had isn't going to completely alleviate the deficits that are in play. We're looking at the system that's coming through over the weekend. When you look at the quantitative precip forecast, it's not as promising as it was on Tuesday. Part of that is looking at the initial production in the Southwest, and there's a very strong moisture signal coming up from the Pacific, but it hasn't translated into a lot of rain on the ground, and that's why there's been more concerns about how productive this system will be.
Any estimation on what we may see? At least an inch or far less?
Well, we're looking at it over the weekend, going through Thursday into Monday. We're looking at maybe a half an inch, and that will be concentrated from south central to extreme western part of northeast Kansas. The northwest and west central may not see anything at all out of that. If we look at the longer view and go through next Thursday, generally we're looking at getting somewhere between 3/4 of an inch and an inch statewide. That could be very good because it could be more on the beneficial nature, not as much overflow, not as much flooding potential from it, but it is likely to be coming over several days, so it may delay harvest and also slow down planting for that winter wheat or any of the fall-seeded crops that people are looking at.
Fall does officially begin tomorrow. What's the outlook as we head into fall?
Well, if we look at the October outlook, which was released on Thursday, they are calling for a slight chance for wetter than normal conditions in southwest Kansas and equal chances for wetter and drier across the state, which is going to be pretty welcome. It does look like temperatures may be slightly on the cool side. There's a slight chance for that. We're looking for a significant chance for colder than normal conditions to start October, so it'll be a question of how it ends up. When we look at the last third of the year, which is October, November, December, the outlook keeps that wet signal in southwest Kansas, but is neutral for the rest of the state. And the overall temperature pattern is for warmer than normal conditions. Keep in mind those normal temperatures drop considerably as we move from October into December, so you could have fairly cold temperatures and still be warmer than normal.
And what can we expect this weekend?
Well, the biggest question will be how much moisture do we wring out of the system. We have a fairly good chance going into Monday and Tuesday are really when we're going to pick up those chances. Temperature-wise, is a very strong signal for cooler than normal temperatures. When we look at this last week, ending on September 18th, the trend was warmer than normal. Northwest in particular was almost 10 degrees warmer than average. So it'll be a very strong change when we're looking at going into that cooler than normal temperatures. Doesn't necessarily mean that we'll drop into freezing temperatures, but we're likely to see highs only in the 70s. And in eastern Kansas, those have been what our nighttime lows have run. So again, it will be a fairly dramatic and not unwelcome shift in that temperature pattern.
That's K-State climatologist Mary Knapp with a look at Kansas agricultural weather. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. Have a great weekend and be sure to join us again on Monday. This is the K-State Radio Network.